Welcome back to Be More, where I inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce community. And in today's session, we are learning about technical architects, and we are aiming to inspire you to be more technical architect. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Sam. And without further ado, Sam, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Tom, and hello, everybody. So my name is Sam Wadhwani. I'm a Salesforce Technical Architect and CTA. I live in Surrey with my wife, my two boys, and my two cats, who were enough for me to handle. I've been consulting in CRM technology for nearly 18 years, I think it is, originally in Siebel, and the last 12 and a half years have been in Salesforce. So a seasoned CRM consultant. I've worked on a large number of projects in my experience in a number of sectors, including telco, not-for-profit, FMCG, consumer goods, pharma, life sciences, but more recently, in the last 8 to 10 years, focused on financial services. So everything from insurance to banking, capital markets, that sort of stuff.
Perfect. Well, welcome again. And maybe we can start by a discussion about what your role. So some people listening, they might not understand what a technical architect is. Are you able to kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, so I work for a company called PwC or PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I co-lead our architecture practice within the Salesforce Technology Consulting. It means that I'm focused on the quality of what we deliver to our customers, but also keeping abreast of the innovations in the ecosystem technologies and Salesforce clouds. More importantly, though, the patterns and the practices that we use both in solving problems for our clients, but also in building assets and things that help us deliver more rapidly. For our clients, I perform a hybrid role, actually, part of which is the technical architecture side. And typically what I'm doing there is working through the key design decisions that shape what we need to build in design to highlight the trade-offs and offer a recommendation to our customers or our stakeholders, but also to support our team throughout the delivery. So ensuring that we're building the right thing, basically, and that we're resolving any technical issues as they arise. So that's part of the role. The other part of the role is more aligned to the CTA skills, and that's as an enterprise architect to understand more of the longer term vision to help form the roadmap of what we deliver over a time frame, but also to contribute to the governance and the design forums that are involved in that delivery, and identify any areas where we might have risks that may be encountered during the implementation or delivery itself.
Perfect. I think that's great. And it's obviously very varied and interesting work that you must do there. So we kind of reflected a little bit on some key points there. So in terms of frameworks, is that something that you kind of work on as well? Do you have some internal frameworks that you've implemented? Are there any other frameworks out there that you would suggest?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. I mean, some of the typical frameworks tend to be around the way you structure code, the way you sort of break down code into modular pieces that afford the ilities, really, the reuse, the flexibility, things like that, performance, separation of concerns, to make sure things are encapsulated and only do one function. So they're simple enough to build together. But also, we all know about trigger frameworks, or most of us know about trigger frameworks, whether you're an admin or whether you're a functional consultant or whether you're a developer or an architect. They always come up. And the same principles are true in flows, for example, but they're also true at a more macro level as well, whether it be deciding what this specific method in a class might be and what its purpose is versus what a subflow purpose might be and what its responsibilities are. And you can go even higher than that, more abstract. So what an entire system's capabilities and purposes as well in amongst a broader landscape. So it sort of transcends all those different levels as a technical architect. You have to think in layers.
Yeah. And how do you communicate that to customers who aren't perhaps as technical? Because that's a big part of your role, right? Getting the customer on board and
Yeah.
making sure that you have like a great working relationship. How would you translate that to them and make sure that you're on the same journey?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a great question. It's something that happens all the time, right? That you might have an idea or you might have a concept, but actually getting the buy-in from the stakeholders is a difficult thing to do. I always say that it might be a bit of a cliche, but the knowledge and the certs are great, but they're sort of foundational, and not everybody needs to know how much you know, sort of thing. Certainly your audience doesn't need that. The real value and skill comes in how you apply it and how you communicate it. As a technical architect, there are two things that I would say are most important skills. One being able to comprehend complex and articulate both the problem and the solution in a clear and concise manner. So on the one hand, you've got the assimilation of that information into an organized format.
Yeah.
And you might use things like mental models or catalogs to sort of summarize. It might be mind maps or other approaches, and that's really just to frame the problem. On
Yeah.
the other hand, you might use diagrams and artifacts, documents, presentations, and call outs, I call them, that can really deliver impacts and resonate, relate to the audience. So in those things, it's how are you describing what the solution is. Now, if you put your mind on a page, it's not going to be particularly easy to
No.
understand. So it needs some form of visual representation, absolutely, but it comes with the communication, the details really in the communication, using those visual tools to aid the message. Ultimately, I always ask myself, what are the top messages or issues that I want to bring out in what I'm communicating? And focus on those, and then everything else needs to feed into that.
Okay. So kind of like a call to action or
Yeah.
okay. So you kind of make that palatable for the customer, so it's kind of easier to digest and they kind of
Yeah.
get the purpose of why you're doing it and why it's
Right.
done that way. Is that fair?
You have to understand your audience as well.
Mm.
A CTO is not going to have the same concerns as a product owner or a sponsor. They're going to be more focused on, okay, tell me why this is going to cost me less money to support or something like that,
Yeah.
versus what's going to drive my revenue, or what's going to drive my efficiency in my team, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And is it fair to say that a technical architect is mostly involved on kind of bigger enterprise projects, and whatever projects you are involved in, how do you kind of interact with other roles, and what other key roles do you interact with?
I'd say the technical architects work typically quite closely with the enterprise architects to ensure that they've got that alignment to the technology strategy, but they also have to work with business sponsors and sometimes team members to sort of shape what is delivered within the context of value to the business. It goes without saying that the role provides an escalation point to the delivery team. So so for example, our technical leads, developers, functional consultants, we need to be very tightly coupled or hooked into what's going on the ground, so that when any issues do arise, we can quickly lean in, we can quickly understand the problem, and then provide direction to resolve those issues. So it's sort of quite a few roles in essence
Yeah.
that we have to interact with.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it's primarily kind of a senior type leadership type role, and I guess part of it is about coaching and mentoring people. Is that fair?
Sometimes I've seen quite a few technical architects take on more of the technical side,
Mhm.
and therefore they are focused on the underlying tech itself. Coaching in the sense of supporting the
Yeah.
delivery team itself, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
On the larger scale of implementations, you tend to have more than one architect. So the technical architect tends to be quite broad and deep. You then may have some specialist architects in a domain such as integration or data, it might be marketing, that you might see as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say the technical architect coaches other architects per se, but provides that air cover from a technical perspective for the developers and the admins and so on.
Okay, and that's great. And how about in terms of, do you typically see people being architects full time, for example, with other roles like a consultant? If they're working for a smaller consultancy, there might be part consultant, part BA, part project manager, maybe even part admin as well. Mm-hmm. Does that really translate the same in the world of technical architects, or are you kind of primarily focused on that as your core goal?
Yeah, so it's a funny one. I have to give a typical consultant's answer, which is it depends.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes, an architect's role is typically full time, but I do see elements of the role, one or two perhaps, being incorporated as stretch responsibilities for people like tech leads. They might venture into some of the architecture responsibilities or skills. Solution and integration architects, they tend to do other elements, to a degree functional consultants too, because there's a fine line between a functional consultant and a solution architect in some cases. So it tends to be smaller engagements where there's a need for the team to wear maybe one main hat and then one or two partial hats to attain that sort of high level of quality and consideration, where there isn't necessarily a dedicated role. On larger engagements, the role has much more of a well-defined boundary, even though it's still quite broad. So in most cases, it's full-time, especially on the larger engagements. In the smaller engagements, it's still full-time, but it tends to be spread amongst more people.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I like the typical consultant response then. It depends. I don't know what you think, but I would kind of suggest the typical architect response as there's pros and cons of that, right? Yeah. What do you think? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's true. And that's one of the areas that I think is you've got to remember is that certainly a technical architect, their role is to really identify those issues, help people to understand what the options are, or what the scale and impact of the problem is, understand what the options are, and then for each of the options, what are the trade-offs between them, with a recommendation and a rationale as justification for why that might be the most optimal way forward.
Yeah, and I think that's even more important in an ecosystem or a platform as like Salesforce, because there are lots of different ways of doing something. And sometimes you have to think, well, what about in 2 years' time when they need to change this, or their business process changes, or things like that? That's important too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult one to just fall into, if you see what I mean, because you have to have organized your thoughts, really sort of thought about why that is the best option, sort of thing. So
yeah, and I think to an extent, this type of role, sometimes you kind of learn on the job, and you're kind of learning by doing something perhaps initially in a suboptimal way. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's right. So I'd say there are a number of dimensions, skills, whatever you want to call them, attributes, architects that achieve quite a bit tend to have, and that one of them is that sort of humility and growth mindset that it sort of dispels the myth that technical architects and certainly CTAs know everything or they're experts. That's not true.
Yeah,
they simply are able to operate really effectively in a unique circumstance based on broad and deep technical understanding. Ultimately, the skill that they have is that curiosity to ask the questions, to challenge themselves, to potentially fail, and explore why did that not work, or why might that not be the most optimal option. And it may be that there's 9 reasons why it's a good solution and one killer that completely blows it out the water. Whereas another one might have a balance, but that one can take it out of contention as an option.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's solid advice there, and definitely something for our audience to think about. moving on slightly, but you've hinted at it already, but that broad technical understanding is definitely kind of something that if somebody was looking out to develop into this role over time, that's probably one kind of attribute or skill that they would need. Is there anything else that you would say is particularly important in the role?
Yeah, so I'd say the mindset, knowledge and experience is the baseline, right? And there's a that's a foundation that it's a solid foundation that you should seek to achieve, first of all. It's about how you apply it that counts. So think about perhaps how you measure the success or the quality of your design or your implementation, but do it in a way that is a measure of how you've provided the entities with evidence. And when I say entities, I mean, how did what you design or what you were responsible for as an architect, how did that demonstrate that it was flexible, meaning that it took very little to change it in the future when the requirements changed? How
Yeah,
did it stand up to performance? How did it stand up to the reuse, for example? So, could in the future, when a new requirement came along, how much of what you had put in place component wise could be used elsewhere
yeah,
and continue to deliver value? So it's got longevity in its success. That for me is a measure of great architecture. I talked about the mindset as well. And what's important is how you approach the problem, not necessarily the answer to solve the problem. So how you reason about it and how you explore and formulate the solution is really what's important. And then we already talked about when you've understood the problem, referred to the knowledge, or you've gone back to the documentation, or you've gone out and practiced it, or whatever it is, you've then decided, okay, this is the way to go. Don't underestimate the power of being able to communicate that effectively to
yeah.
to people as well, because it could be that you've got the best solution in the world. If no one understands it and no one understands the reasons for why that is is the best, it's not going to be adopted, it's not going to be accepted, and it's not going to succeed.
And I guess so to an extent, it's about selling the solution, right?
Got to be careful, but
Yeah,
selling it, selling anything tends to have a an ultimate intent in the outcome, right? In this situation, because ultimately people are going to use it and it needs to deliver value to the business, it has to be based on facts, evidence, and and
yeah.
sound judgment. No sort of smoke and mirrors here, sort of thing.
No, definitely something for our audience to consider. So we've touched on it a little bit already, but if you were to start out in this role again, what would you change, do differently, apart from maybe be a bit more embracing of those times where things don't necessarily go to plan? What other things would you change or influence differently?
If I was starting out as an architect again, I'd definitely use my network more. And I think that's something that I think people should really sort of see the value in. And it's not just about acquaintances; it's about people who understand what they do,
Yeah,
and you understand the role that they play, and you actively seek them out to learn from them, or learn how they do things, or learn what their thought processes were, that sort of thing. In relation to that, I would seek more opinions and socialize my own thoughts for discussion more. I think social media's got a lot to answer for.
yeah,
Make it clear that it's for discussion. It's not a statement of fact. I think the discussion is far more valuable than the outcome, if that makes sense.
yeah, definitely. And I think part of the discussion is the debate as well. Is that a fair
Mm.
assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we live in a really diverse world now with people coming from lots of different backgrounds, perspectives, experience levels, and things like that, and everybody's opinion from their own lens is is valuable.
If there was a myth or kind of an assumption about architects that you would perhaps want to challenge or change, is there anything that kind of comes to mind that you would like to kind of demyth or debunk a rumor about architects or specifically technical architects, I should say? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think I mentioned some already. So things like that, then not necessarily don't know everything, but they know how to approach a problem. That's, number one. The other thing is that it's not beyond anyone in other roles to be able to develop into an architect role. It can be sometimes seen as this sort of utopia or, ivory tower role that is difficult to get into. As long as you focus on those areas, such as, the mindset, the foundation of knowledge and experience, the way to approach a problem, and work on your communication, work on how you understand and assimilate the information, then actually these aren't technical per se.
Yeah.
These are skills, right? So other roles can easily sort of develop into those. The other thing I would say is it perhaps controversially, I don't know, it's one of those roles that you can't really practically fake. If you try, you'll easily and in some cases catastrophically be found out. If you
Yeah.
try and be honest with yourself, it can be achieved, and anyone could do it, if you focus on the right things.
This is just something that I'm maybe coming at from a personal angle now, but do you need a degree to be an architect? What do you think about that?
Well, I sort of come back to the same principles, right? I don't think so, but I think in these days, what is the degree giving you that you won't necessarily get out, in a vocational capacity? You may experience more varied problems in a vocational capacity because the variables are too many, sort of thing, to control. Whereas in a degree, the circumstances are very controlled and they're very structured.
Yeah.
The real world is very unstructured, right?
Yeah.
So actually, if you come out of a degree with analytical skills or an ability to sort of, tackle a technical problem, you might have more knowledge there. But a vocational person might have more of the mindset and the approach.
Yeah, and maybe be a little bit more adaptable. Things do change. You can't control all of those variables, as you so nicely put it. So
Mm.
I think part of the role is about adapting to that and understanding, okay, we've tried this, what do we do now, type thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, spot on.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this to a little bit of a close. But before we go, how can people connect with you and your content to kind of be inspired to learn a little bit more about what a technical architect is?
So I'm on LinkedIn, mostly, so you can reach out to me there. I think it's /Sam Wadhwani. I also do have a blog called theaccessiblearchitect.com, where it combines both technical side of, architecture with the softer skills, which I think we've talked about on here as well, and and how to tackle more of that. And I'm on Twitter for my sins as well at accessiblearch.
Thanks again for your time today. And hopefully when people listen to this, they will be a little bit more inspired to perhaps become or be more technical architects. So thanks. Thanks for tuning in to Be More with Tom Bassett. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave any feedback in the comments.